On the long, winding roads that snake through Central and Eastern Europe, an unseen war is being fought every single day. These aren't just highways. They're Ukraine's lifelines. They are the arteries pumping everything from high-tech missile systems to basic medical supplies from the West into the heart of the battlefield. It's a logistical tango on an unprecedented scale, a constant and critical flow that has become a crucial strategic element in this conflict. Every single day, thousands of trucks, trains, and even cargo planes are engaged in a race against time, a silent promise to Kyiv that they will not be abandoned. They carry the very sinew of war: advanced artillery shells, HIMARS rocket pods, spare parts for Abrams tanks, and the critical medical kits that save lives on the front line. This steady stream of aid, this constant strategic resupply, has been one of the biggest factors preventing a total Russian victory. The sheer complexity of this operation is staggering. It involves military planners from Washington to Warsaw, coordinating movements across dozens of European borders, all while under the constant gaze of Russian intelligence. Satellite imagery, cyber espionage, and a network of spies are all at play in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Russia knows precisely where these supplies are being stored and where they're heading. They see the trains arriving at depots, the trucks being loaded, and the convoys moving east. So far, they have limited their strikes to targets inside Ukraine, but the question that keeps commanders awake at night is, for how long? The reason they haven't targeted these logistical hubs or convoys outside Ukraine is simple. It would be an act of war against a NATO member, triggering Article 5. That's a red line that not even Vladimir Putin has been willing to cross. It would be a catastrophic gamble, a direct confrontation between two nuclear-armed adversaries, and a risk of global conflict that no one truly wants to take. But the war is changing. Both sides are digging in for a long, grinding conflict. For Russia, their initial blitzkrieg has failed. Their conventional military has been bogged down, and their economy is bleeding under the weight of sanctions. They are now fighting a war of attrition against an adversary that is not only determined, but is being consistently and increasingly supplied with the most advanced weaponry the West has to offer. The introduction of long-range precision missiles and modern fighter jets like the F-16s could be the final straw for Moscow. Facing a strategic dead end, they may see escalation as their only viable option. This isn't just about a single missile. It's about a series of calculated, simultaneous strikes aimed at paralyzing the entire supply chain. It's a risk of biblical proportions, an all-or-nothing move designed to force a victory before the West's full military support can turn the tide of the war for good. And if it happens, all bets are off. The world would be on the brink of a direct conflict between two nuclear powers. The calm on those European highways would be replaced by a terrifying silence, and the strategic landscape of the entire world would be changed forever. So let's run the scenario. It's a cold morning in late fall. Russian missiles, or perhaps a swarm of drones and a coordinated cyber attack, hit a major rail yard in Poland near the Ukrainian border. Simultaneously, a key bridge in Slovakia is destroyed, and a convoy of US-supplied equipment is targeted just a few miles inside Polish territory. The immediate fallout would be chaos. The logistical pipeline would be severed, not just for a few hours, but potentially for weeks, maybe even months. Ukraine's military, already rationing ammunition in some areas, would face a critical shortage of everything. The Ukrainian front line would become a pressure cooker. Troops would run out of shells for their artillery. Their air defense systems would be starved of interceptors, leaving them vulnerable to a new wave of Russian airstrikes. The ability to hold back a new Russian offensive would be gone. The military repercussions would be immediate and devastating. Without a fresh flow of weapons and ammunition, Ukraine's hard-won momentum would evaporate. Counteroffensives would stall, and a desperate defensive war of attrition would begin, but this time, with one hand tied behind their backs. For Moscow, this would be a calculated and deeply cynical gamble, a strategic maneuver to win the war on their terms, regardless of the consequences. But the biggest question isn't about Ukraine, though. It's about what comes next. What does NATO do? What does the United States do? This isn't just an attack on a supply line. It's a direct, undeniable act of aggression against a NATO member. For Washington, the moment of decision has arrived. The US and its allies would be faced with a terrifying choice. The first response would be in the situation rooms, a sudden shift from contingency planning to real-world crisis management. The National Security Council would convene at the White House. The Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Director of National Intelligence would all present a grim picture. The political pressure would be immense. From Congress, there would be bipartisan calls for a strong, swift response. From our allies, a sense of fear and urgency. Under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, an attack on one member is an attack on all. It's the cornerstone of the alliance, a promise of collective defense. But invoking it is a monumental decision, a step toward potential military confrontation with a nuclear power. There would be a fierce debate within the alliance. Frontline states like Poland and the Baltic nations, feeling vindicated in their warnings, would demand a direct military response. Others, particularly some Western European nations, would urge caution, fearing a spiral into a wider, more destructive conflict. And make no mistake, Russia would have already calculated this. They would argue the strikes were a defensive action against a hostile military infrastructure supporting an enemy. It's a classic Russian playbook move. Create a crisis, push the boundaries, and then see how the West reacts. They would be betting that the fear of a full-blown war is too great, and that the alliance would hesitate. They would rely on NATO's political divisions to create a crack in the alliance, hoping to weaken its resolve. But for America, the stakes are existential. Our credibility as a global leader and as the backbone of NATO would be on the line. If we don't respond decisively to an attack on our allies, what does that say about our commitments? What would that signal to China, Iran, and other adversaries looking to test the resolve of the West? A timid or delayed response could be seen as a green light for more aggression, not just in Europe, but across the globe. If Russia were to successfully choke the supply lines and paralyze Ukraine's war effort, the consequences would echo across the globe. First, a swift Russian military advance would be highly likely. Without the constant flow of weapons and ammunition, Ukrainian forces would be forced to retreat, ceding strategic territory and potentially leading to the collapse of some front lines. The entire war could shift dramatically, putting Russia back on the path to a military victory and allowing them to dictate terms. The dream of a free and sovereign Ukraine, fully restored to its pre-2014 borders, would likely be put on hold indefinitely. Second, the political fallout in Washington and Brussels would be immense. The public would demand answers. Why didn't we anticipate this? Was our strategy flawed? There would be a fierce debate about the future of Western support for Ukraine. The unity of the NATO alliance would be tested to its breaking point. A lack of consensus on how to respond would lead to a period of deep mistrust and recrimination among allies. The very concept of collective defense would be thrown into question. For a generation, Article 5 has been the ultimate deterrent, the final word against aggression. If it were to fail in this moment of truth, the entire foundation of Western security would crumble, and this is where the real danger lies. A perceived weakening of NATO would be a green light for other geopolitical rivals. A scenario like this could embolden China to take more aggressive action against Taiwan, seeing a divided West as unable to respond effectively to a major regional conflict. It could give Iran more leeway in the Middle East, or inspire other authoritarian regimes to pursue their own territorial ambitions. It's a global domino effect. The entire international order, built on the premise that such aggression would be met with overwhelming force, would be in question. In the end, this hypothetical scenario isn't just about Ukraine. It's about the very nature of conflict in the 21st century. It shows us that the biggest threats always come from massive tank battles or fighter jet dogfights. They can come from a single, calculated decision to cross a line that has, for decades, been considered untouchable. We're in the red zone now, and the world is about to find out how far Russia is willing to push and how far the West is willing to go.